All right. In this video, I'm going to discuss my thoughts about van life, people living in vans, and the pros and cons of doing so. First off, I wouldn't consider people living in their cars because they're too poor to afford rent as van life, right? It's kind of ridiculous to watch these documentaries about families with like three children living in a Toyota Camry because the US economy is in a recession and call that van life. Van life is voluntary. You could live in an apartment, but you choose to live in a van. Living in a car because you have no choice and you're too poor to afford an apartment is not van life. I also wouldn't consider RVing to be the same as van life. The reason for this is because although both involve voluntarily living for an extended period of time in a vehicle, the underlying motivations for each of these two groups are very different. So in the United States, people RV because they're retired. And honestly, I think because they get bored and don't know what else to do with their life after they've stopped working and their children are adults. So buying an RV and driving around to various destinations gives them a reason to wake up and get out of bed in the morning. It gives them a goal. It's like maybe they've never cared about visiting a national park in their life, but now that visiting that park gives them some goal that prevents them from feeling directionless and purposeless, now all of a sudden they have this bucket list to visit every national park. Van life, on the other hand, I think is motivated not so much from a desire to have direction, but more because of a desire to escape. So people want to escape from their jobs, their boss, the social expectations that we put on upon them, the expectations of their family, et cetera, et cetera. There's this sense in Western society at the moment that no matter how hard you work, because of inflation and wage stagnation, that there's really no way to make any financial progress. There's a sense that you're just a cog in the system. People view the walls of their apartment and feel like the walls are imprisoning them. They're living paycheck to paycheck at some job they hate just to keep themselves within the walls that they hate. So people don't want to lay roots in a system that exploits them. They want to escape from it. So from that desire, the van life fantasy is born. So it seems like van life leans in one of two flavors. There's the lowbrow, steampunk, scrappy MacGyver van lifer, and then there's the upscale, pristine social media influencer van lifer. The steampunk van lifer may also have social media, but that's sort of a secondary motivation behind their van. The steampunk van lifer's van is going to be used, of course. It's going to be some 90s era van with rust spots, likely with a low top roof that they bought off of Craigslist. It might not even be a van. For steampunk van lifer, really anything with four wheels and a running engine will do. The interior conversion really is barely a conversion at all. There's probably a bed that they threw together with some plywood. The kitchen is a hot plate. There's almost certainly no bathroom. Maybe they have a composting toilet that they whip out from somewhere when needed. The steampunk van lifer is very much about using the van as a means to an end. So that is to save up money and travel to various outdoor destinations. They enjoy biking, hiking, surfing, having a dog, those type of activities. The second flavor of van lifer is, of course, the social media influencer. And you can identify this flavor immediately because the van itself is sort of the whole point, right? So they've done an extensive conversion. A significant amount of attention has been given to both the functionality and the aesthetics of the van. It's clearly a van that's meant to be seen. The van quality is going to be much higher than the steampunk van lifer. It's probably a Sprinter or a Ford Transit, likely with a high top roof because that's how you do it. The interior obviously will have a very well thought out layout with a bed, a kitchen, an actual stove and sink. They likely have a built-in shower and toilet area. The van overall actually tries to mimic a traditional living space in appearance rather than just looking like the inside of a shed, as is the case with the steampunk van lifer. So obviously, this is an oversimplification. I'm not saying influencer van lifers are superficial or anything like that. People don't just fit into one of these two boxes. It just seems that most van lifers favor one of these general approaches. So, whichever flavor of van life you choose, there's definitely some appeal to this lifestyle. There's this simplicity and elegance with only owning a few possessions, stuffing them all in your vehicle and just driving wherever you want, whenever you want. There's this feeling of weightlessness, right? It's like you're not tied down to a bunch of bills. You don't have to, always pay your rent payment. So there's this sense that you just don't have as many things to worry about. You don't have as many responsibilities. Of course, you also get the novelty of traveling, which, we're all obsessed with these days. And you overall just feel like you're not paying as much money for things that you don't care about. You have your car payment, but you probably already had that before you started to live in the car. And it's not just broke college kids who do van life. There's professionals like nurses and doctors who do it too, even though they're not as financially destitute, I don't think. They see the appeal and efficiency of the lifestyle. All of that being said, there's definitely a lot of downsides to living this way, which will be the main focus of this video. At this point in 2024, there's plenty of videos on YouTube made by people who did van life for various periods of time, for between a few months and several years consecutively, pointing out all of the downsides of van life, which I'll go into. First, there's the issue with maintaining a comfortable temperature within the van. So van lifers do their best to insulate their vans during the conversion phase, but ultimately the installation of a vehicle just isn't as good as a traditional structure. So the van always leaks, and the leaks are very difficult to find. That's a big problem I would hear being pointed out by the van lifers. You're limited by weight and wattage regarding how powerful an air conditioning unit you can include in the van, if you include one at all. This means that you can be hot and miserable since you're literally living inside of a metal can, or you can potentially freeze to death if you're somewhere during the wintertime. It's just not that easy to control the climate inside a vehicle like it is when you're living in a building. Next is electrical. Probably the most extensive and interesting part of van life conversions to me is the electrical system. They create these elaborate power banks, including multiple lithium ion batteries, inverters, solar panels, etc. Yet, despite all of these, most van lifers seem to always have to pay constant attention to how much electricity they're using. They have to ration it out like they're living in some third world country with an unstable power grid. It's like they can only use the coffee machine once, or else they deplete their entire battery bank. That's something you obviously don't have to do when you're living in an apartment or a house. You're probably mindful of turning the lights out when you're not needing them to save a few dollars, but you're definitely not, rationing how many times you can use your coffee machine. Another problem with the van is that since it's both your home and transportation, everywhere you go, you have to bring your house with you, right? So if you want to go to the store quickly to pick up some food, you have to drive the entire van. And many of these vans are just huge, right? Like the Sprinter high top vans with the extended wheelbase, these things are just gigantic, and you can't fit them into most parking garages or small parking spaces. So it really kind of limits you to where you go when you're driving one of these vans. Living in the van itself also just doesn't give you as much space as you would have if you're living in an apartment or a house. You just don't have anywhere to put the stuff, right? So you spent most of your space inside the van just putting in the bed and the refrigerator and the shower and all of these amenities that you really don't have much space for anything else, right? It's like you can barely fit yourself inside one of these vans. And so you really have to be picky about what additional items you're going to bring with you, right? It's like, if you like to mountain bike, then you're going to have to find some way to stash a bike inside your van. And if you spend the space on the bike, then, well, you can't really have anything else. Another common complaint I heard was that when living in a van, you have to constantly be cleaning up everything. This is because whenever you get in and out of the van, you're bringing dirt, mud, etc. This isn't a problem in a house because you have a bedroom that's separate from the entrance. But when you live in a van, you open the door and you're literally in your bedroom, right? The entire space is a tiny box. It's like all of the dirt and filth that would build up in a normal home gets distributed across the entire home, so it takes much longer to notice it. But in a van, it's all concentrated into this tiny little area, so it's immediately noticeable when the place becomes a mess, which seems to be all the time. So the van lifers would complain that all day they'd have to be vacuuming, sweeping, collecting trash, etc. Honestly, it just sounded very exhausting listening to them describe just the average day living in the van and constantly having to clean up all of the dirt and the dust and the trash. Another con I heard referenced often from pretty much every van lifer is that they have this constant anxiety that someone's going to knock on the door of their van in the middle of the night, whether that's the police because the van is parked illegally or some random stranger just trying to harass you, right? So when you're living full time in a van, a lot of the time you might be at some campsite or on BLM land, but sometimes you're going to drive into civilization and you need to figure out somewhere to park the van overnight. And since you're, living in your van, you're going to be sleeping in the van. And so you have to really pay attention to the local laws of your area, wherever you're driving through, because certain places you just can't park your van and the police will come and either fine you or ask you to move or both. And so now you're not sleeping because you're trying to find somewhere to park your van for that night and your entire routine just gets messed up. Overall, it seems like most people who do van life do it for a period of time and then they stop and go back to living in a traditional setting, i.e. an apartment or house. It seems like after a period of time, whether it was 6 months or as long as a few years, people just got bored of the lifestyle. They got tired of putting up with all the inconveniences of living full-time in a van, living in a cramped space, constant cleaning, having to empty your own toilet, having to ration electricity, not showering regularly, not having anywhere to store items, the constant anxiety about being woken up at night. I think people don't realize how much they care about the amenities of a regular home until they don't have them. For all the gripes about paying rent, even if it's outrageous, at least you get these amenities like actual plumbing and air conditioning and constant access to the electrical grid. You get a structure that's going to keep you pretty much separated from the weather outside. You get plenty of space to cook and move around and store food in your stuff. You can feel secure when you sleep, and all of these add up to determine your quality of life. It also seemed like most van lifers got some degree of depression. This was probably because of the lack of permanent social connections because they were constantly on the road moving from place to place. Many of them mention this, right? So if you're constantly on the move, you're not going to be able to make friends. And even if you do make friends, you're not going to be able to see them at regular intervals or at a regular time period. It seems like once the initial excitement faded, the novelty of the lifestyle wore off. Even constant traveling, if done constantly, becomes mundane. And all that was left was the inconveniences we already talked about and the lack of any meaningful, lasting social connection. I can see people doing van life for maybe a short period of time in their 20s when they don't really have any responsibilities like a kid or a career that requires them to be in the same spot. But after that brief period of time, eventually they'll go back to living in a traditional home. That seemed to be a common pattern among van lifers. In my late 20s, I lived out of a car for about 3 weeks during a vacation through the Pacific Northwest and to Yellowstone National Park. And even with that small taste, I couldn't see myself living that way for more than short stretches at a time. Sleeping in the car was actually pretty comfortable, but I think that was just because I got lucky with the weather at the time of year I went. If it was hotter or colder, I don't think I would have enjoyed it very much. And as far as meals go, I did most of my cooking over a campfire or ate at restaurants. Showering, I didn't do much of that at all. I'm hesitant to even call that experience a taste of van life, but that's the closest I've gotten. So the advantage of van life seems to be that it can allow you to stay at a destination for an extended period of time. Right, you can haul in a bunch of supplies using a vehicle, then stay there for several weeks at a time without having to resupply. And that's what it seems like most van lifers use their vans to do anyway. And what they really used the van for was to bring a bunch of electricity, water, food, and supplies to some destination in nature, giving them some of the amenities of home. And because of this, it never really made much sense to me why you even need a van conversion at all. I mean, all you really need is a truck or a trailer to haul all of these supplies to where you want to be. And then you can just set up a tent and then just live in the tent. What's the need for the van with the built-in shower and the built-in bed and the built-in kitchen and all of these different things? It just seems sort of unnecessarily complicated. How about instead of doing a full van conversion, you just get a travel trailer and hitch it to your car? That way you can detach the trailer when you're not using it and just use your car. So that gives you the mobility of the car with the additional amenities and supplies of the trailer. And this setup also protects you in the case of an accident. So if you live in a van and the van breaks down, you've lost all your possessions and also your home when that van gets towed to the repair shop. So where are you going to live while the van is being repaired? With a detachable trailer, you separate the drivetrain from the living and storage facilities. That way, if the car breaks down or you want to upgrade your car, you don't have to also get rid of the trailer. With a van conversion, you would have to redo the whole thing. In the future, I see myself using some of the ideas and principles of van life to live a sort of hybrid style rather than actually living full-time in a van. I would have a home base and use it as a launching pad for shorter term camping / hiking trips, like 1 to 3 months at a time. I would live out of the travel trailer. The trailer itself would be customized for my needs and towed behind my car rather than doing a full van conversion. I would still get the essence of van life this way, but it seems like a more practical and sustainable way rather than trying to live full time in a van, which seems to be unsustainable.